We don't get enough offbeat RPGs. In a realm that's dominated by medieval fantasy and sci-fi, it feels exceptionally rare when an outsider steps up and delivers something that breaks the mold. So when I read the description for My Familiar that simply refers to it as a duck-heavy buddy cop RPG, I was like, yep. And then when I saw the accompanying screenshots and animated cinematic trailer that includes a jazzy ska cover of House of the Rising Sun, I was like, My Familiar comes from Something Classic Games, a small studio that seems to specialize in retro RPGs, and that is exactly what you're going to get when you boot up this demo. From the opening scene when your character washes up on an unfamiliar shore and you hear the SNES-inspired soundtrack kick in, coupled with the detailed but slightly muddled pixel graphics, you'll feel like you were transported back to the era of Chrono Trigger and Legend of Mana. But in contrast to those games, things look a little different here. Is grime fantasy a thing? Because if there's a term I could use to describe the aesthetic of My Familiar, it's grime fantasy. This is a world that's disheveled, dirty, and quite literally covered in trash. But it also features vibrant highlights and a variety of colors that end up creating a really good-looking environment that seems to contrast with itself in all the right ways. The best comparison I can give here is something like the whimsically distorted noir worlds of Hotline Miami or The Wolf Among Us, smashed together with a top-down retro art style. And all of that comes together really nicely here, resulting in a world that, at least for the 90-minute demo I played, feels fresh and almost invigorating in a way. The game is being advertised as an inner-city gauntlet with over-the-top battles, and much of the demo takes place in one such environment. But despite the challenge of working with a world type that can become oppressing in other games, there's several striking, memorable sets you'll come across in My Familiar. The strength of this game's art direction and visual style is apparent from the get-go, and although we're only witnessing one slice of it here in the demo, it's enough to tell us that we'll likely have a lot to look forward to in this department in the final version of the game. And it's not just the game's world that stands out, it's also the creatures and characters that inhabit it. There's a zany but charming cast at play here, many of which are interpretations of real-life animals, but many are also not based in reality whatsoever. Like this thing. Your main character is an amalgamation of unknown origins, and based on what we know so far about future party members, they're all going to be just as bizarre. And these characters are fun to be around, because despite the depressing, corrupt world that's established, it's the writing that defines the tone of My Familiar. And that tone is a specific brand of down-on-your-luck comedy that blends well with the outrageous situations you'll come across. Recently, some high-profile games have received a lot of heat for their bafflingly unlikable main characters.
Am I gonna turn into a crispy critter if I stay in here too long?
But Something Classic Games has managed to create a protagonist that has the doesn't-give-a-shit attitude that these other games are going for, without the layer of grating commentary. Instead of a brash, bitter, I'm surrounded by idiots mentality, your character in My Familiar is keenly aware of all the ridiculous events and interactions going on around them, and their reaction is often just to take note of it, sigh, and move on. In one exchange of dialogue that takes place after a haphazardly lucky escape sequence, one of your party members outlines his plan for your next move that involves making off with a bunch of stuff he just tried to steal. When he asks your character if that sounds like a plan, their response is simply, no? It's a subtle delivery of a simple line, but it really captures the intended realization of how insane everyone else in this world is. Even NPCs in My Familiar are written in a style that calls back to classic RPG world building. There's a bunch of random inhabitants in this environment, and almost all of them will hit you with those vintage one-liners that on the surface seem like throwaway dialogue, but the intent behind them isn't to provide detailed characterization, it's to inform the tone and mood of the world around you. So yeah, most of these NPCs are falling pretty squarely into a template of either hard-nosed tough guy or self-loathing nobody, but add enough of those interactions together and it starts to tell the story behind this world, which is full of comically unfortunate events. A running theme throughout My Familiar is that things never really go as they're planned, and this leads to some genuinely funny moments when the characters realize their actions have resulted in something unexpected. Now, all this trouble you'll find yourself getting into comes alive with the game's classic turn-based battle system. So far it's tough to get a read on how deep this system will become, but what's here now is snappy, well-animated, and fun to watch. The distinct and varied enemy design and battlefield backdrops are easily a highlight of My Familiar. From scene to scene, you'll go from fighting a sneaker-wearing, boombox-carrying group of sheep to facing off against an enemy called a chug dealer, who literally animates piles of garbage into other creatures. Yeah, it's fun. Battle scenes feel incredibly alive thanks to an emphasis on movement throughout them, with characters bouncing around in exaggerated idle animations and attacks almost always getting emphasized with big swings and dramatic flair. Even the backdrop imagery springs to life as there's always something bobbing, rattling, or flashing behind you as you fight. It's a lot of fun, and again, the developers did a great job turning what should be a dreary aesthetic into something actually quite upbeat, and that achievement is helped tremendously by the game's standout soundtrack, which during battles features high-flying jazzy horns layered with groovy guitars and retro synths. So the look and feel of the battle system is outstanding, though it should be noted that the actual mechanics of it are so far pretty standard affair. Characters have access to basic attacks, special skills, and one-use items, and they level up in a traditional fashion with predetermined skills being acquired as you reach new levels. In the demo, these skills exhibit some minor utility, like being able to break an enemy from channeling a spell, or knocking one down in the turn order. These are nice to mix things up for now, but I'm definitely hoping this part of the game opens up quite a bit to allow for some more interesting strategy during battles. I can't help but compare this system to another retro-inspired RPG that's currently in the works, the highly anticipated Sea of Stars, which also saw its own demo recently released. In the hour or so you'll spend with the Sea of Stars demo, you'll be introduced to a suite of battle system enhancements that make things more engaging to the modern player, like its locks and combo system and its subtle use of enemy positioning. There's a variety of interactions between all of these features, and it's easy to see how things will get more complex as the game goes on. In this way, Sea of Stars feels like a true evolution of its old school influences, augmenting certain pieces and expanding upon others to create something all its own. Comparatively, My Familiar feels content with staying true to its own influences and focuses more on polishing established systems in order to bring them to a modern audience. But I think that approach is okay, especially considering the strength of the game's presentation. And despite the simplicity, I still found myself enjoying my time spent fighting enemies in My Familiar. For now, what we're getting is a highly entertaining battle system that feels perfect for 90 minutes or so. A bit of research from the game's Twitter account also tells us that the devs are experimenting with things like time-based attacks, so it's likely that all of the components of the game's battle system are not yet all in place. And with several more party members in the works, as well as a pretty safe bet for some impressively wacky enemy variety, there's plenty of room to grow in this area. A lot of times indie games strike the right amount of weird because they take a chance on combining elements that seemingly shouldn't go well together, and I think that's exactly what we're getting with My Familiar. Its gritty noir world shouldn't also feel this animated and inviting, but it does. Its story of corruption and seediness shouldn't flow so well with its humorous writing, but it does. A lot of elements at play here deliberately contradict one another to result in a product that looks and sounds fantastic, feels great to play, and sticks in your mind even after just a short demo. So really excited to see where this project goes. I think there's a ton of potential here, and this is obviously going to be one to keep an eye on if you enjoy retro-inspired RPGs, or even just games in general that call back to that nostalgic era of gaming. If you want to check out My Familiar for yourself, I'll leave a link to its Steam page below, where you can download the demo and enter the game's strange world for a brief but entertaining ride. Thanks for watching.